Every potato explained.
The potato might be the most quietly underrated vegetable on the planet. It's cheap, it's starchy, and most people treat it as background noise on a plate, something to soak up gravy or get deep fried into a side dish. But here's the thing more people should just admit. The potato is one of the reasons entire civilizations survived, expanded, and reshaped themselves, and the sheer number of distinct varieties out there, each bred for a specific texture, starch level, and job in the kitchen, is genuinely wild once you start paying attention. There are literally thousands of potato varieties grown around the world, and the ones that make it to your grocery store are just a small, curated slice of that. Let's get into it. Russet potatoes. The russet is, in a very real sense, the default potato in most of North America, the workhorse variety with rough, netted brown skin and a dry, fluffy interior once cooked. That texture comes down to starch content since russets are considered a high-starch potato, meaning their cells are packed with dense starch granules and comparatively little water. When you bake or fry a russet, those starch granules absorb heat and swell, then separate from each other easily, which is exactly why a baked russet turns out light and mealy inside instead of dense and waxy. That same high-starch structure is why russets are the standard choice for French fries and hash browns, since their lower moisture content means less steaming and better crisping in hot oil. The russet Burbank, the most common commercial russet, was actually developed by the plant breeder Luther Burbank in the 1870s as a way to breed a potato resistant to the blight that had devastated Ireland's crops decades earlier, and it eventually became the backbone of the American fast food fry industry a full century later. Yukon Gold. Yukon Gold sits right in the middle of the potato spectrum, classified as a medium starch variety, which gives it that distinctive buttery, slightly sweet flavor and a smooth golden yellow flesh even before you add any actual butter to it. That yellow color isn't a coincidence or a marketing trick. It comes from a naturally higher concentration of carotenoids, the same pigment family responsible for the orange in carrots, which also means Yukon Golds carry a bit more vitamin A than a typical white flesh potato. Because it's neither fully starchy nor fully waxy, Yukon Gold holds its shape reasonably well when boiled while still mashing up creamy, which is exactly why it's become the go-to potato for people who want a single variety that can handle roasting, mashing, and boiling without needing 3 different bags in the pantry. It was developed in Canada in the 1960s by crossing a wild South American potato with a North American white variety, and it didn't hit the commercial market until 1980. Relatively recent as far as potato history goes. Red potatoes. Red potatoes, sometimes called red bliss or red Pontiac depending on the specific cultivar, are defined less by their thin red skin, which is really just a cosmetic trait, and more by their low-starch, high-moisture flesh underneath. That low-starch structure means the cells stay bound together tightly during cooking instead of separating, which is why red potatoes hold their shape so well in potato salads, soups, and roasted side dishes instead of collapsing into mush. Their thin skin is also edible and tender enough that most recipes don't bother peeling them at all, which isn't just convenience since a meaningful amount of a potato's fiber and nutrients actually concentrate right underneath the skin. Red potatoes are frequently harvested young as what's sold as new potatoes, a term that refers to immature potatoes of any variety pulled early from the ground before their sugars have fully converted to starch, giving them an even sweeter, waxier bite than a fully mature red potato. Fingerling potatoes. Fingerlings are named for their shape, not a specific botanical family. Small, elongated, and knobby, roughly the size and form of a finger, and they come in dozens of distinct heirloom varieties like Russian banana, French fingerling, and Austrian crescent. Because they're harvested small and immature rather than bred to be small, fingerlings tend to carry a naturally waxy, dense texture with a slightly nutty, earthier flavor than standard round potatoes. Their skin-to-flesh ratio is also much higher than a typical potato, meaning a bigger proportion of every bite comes from that thin, flavorful skin, which is part of why fingerlings hold up so well simply roasted whole with nothing more than olive oil and salt. Many fingerling varieties trace back directly to heirloom South American cultivars that were never bred toward uniform size or shape, the way most commercial potatoes eventually were, which is exactly why they still look so irregular and rustic compared to something like a russet. Purple and blue potatoes. Purple potatoes, including varieties like Purple Majesty and Peruvian purple, get their striking violet color from anthocyanins, the same class of antioxidant pigments responsible for the color in blueberries and red cabbage. Depending on the specific variety, that purple pigment can run just under the skin or all the way through the flesh in solid, dense color, and some studies have suggested purple potatoes carry a meaningfully higher antioxidant load than white-fleshed varieties because of that same anthocyanin content. Texturally, most purple potatoes land on the starchier, drier end of the spectrum, similar to a russet, which makes them well-suited to roasting or frying, where their color actually intensifies rather than fading. Purple potatoes are also one of the closer living relatives to the potato's original wild ancestors, since the Andean region of South America, where the potato was first domesticated somewhere around 8,000 years ago, still cultivates thousands of native varieties in shades of purple, black, and deep red that never made it into mainstream global agriculture. Fried potatoes aside, it's worth pausing on where all of this actually started. Every single variety on this list, no matter how different they look or cook, traces back to wild potato species, first domesticated by indigenous peoples in the Andes Mountains of modern-day Peru and Bolivia. Those early farmers didn't just grow one potato, they cultivated thousands of distinct varieties, adapted to different altitudes, soil types, and frost conditions, a level of genetic diversity that modern industrial agriculture, obsessed with a handful of uniform commercial varieties, has never come close to matching. Fingerlings and purples lean heirloom, but the potato that actually built the modern potato industry is the humble Kennebec. Kennebec potatoes were developed in Maine in the 1940s, specifically to resist late blight, the same fungal disease responsible for the Irish potato famine roughly a century earlier, and they quickly became one of the most widely grown all-purpose potatoes in America because of how well they handle nearly any cooking method. Kennebecs carry a light tan skin and creamy white flesh with a starch content that sits just below a russet, which makes them a favorite among chefs specifically for French fries, since they crisp up beautifully on the outside while staying tender rather than gummy on the inside. Maris Piper. Cross the Atlantic and the default potato changes entirely, since in the United Kingdom the Maris Piper is what the russet is to America, the standard all-purpose variety found in nearly every grocery store and chip shop. Bred in England in 1966 and named after the Plant Breeding Institute at Maris Lane in Cambridge, Maris Piper was specifically developed to resist potato cyst eelworm, a soil-dwelling pest that was decimating British potato crops at the time. It carries a medium to high starch content with pale yellow flesh, and it's become so deeply associated with British fish and chips that many chip shop owners will tell you no other variety produces quite the same fluffy interior and crisp golden exterior. King Edward. Another British staple, the King Edward potato, was actually introduced all the way back in 1902 and named in honor of King Edward VII's coronation that same year. Distinguished by its pale skin with distinctive pink-red blushing around the eyes, King Edward is prized specifically for roasting, since its starch structure creates that classic craggy, fluffy exterior when roasted in fat that so many British Sunday roasts are built around. It's remarkable that a potato variety bred over a century ago is still in wide commercial cultivation today, especially given how aggressively most crops get replaced by newer, higher-yield varieties within a few decades: Adirondack Blue and Adirondack Red. Developed at Cornell University in the early 2000s, these two varieties were bred specifically for their strikingly saturated solid color, running straight through the flesh rather than just under the skin, unlike many older purple and red varieties where the color fades toward the center. Beyond looking dramatic on a plate, both were bred with slightly higher antioxidant concentrations as an explicit goal of the breeding program, making them a rare example of a potato variety developed as much for nutritional marketing as for yield or disease resistance. La Bonne. On the opposite end of the availability spectrum sits La Bonne, a tiny, delicate French potato grown almost exclusively on the small island of Noirmoutier off France's Atlantic coast, where the sandy, seaweed-enriched soil is credited with giving it an unusually sweet, faintly salty flavor. It's harvested entirely by hand, has an extremely short growing season, and its thin skin makes it nearly impossible to transport or store for long, which is exactly why La Bonnotte routinely sells for hundreds of dollars per kilogram and is considered one of the most expensive potatoes in the world. Sweet potatoes and yams, a quick clarification. It's worth stopping here to clear up one of the most persistent mix-ups in the entire vegetable world. Sweet potatoes aren't potatoes at all, botanically speaking, and they're not related to true yams either, despite American grocery stores frequently mislabeling orange sweet potatoes as yams. True potatoes belong to the nightshade family alongside tomatoes and eggplants, while sweet potatoes belong to the morning glory family, and true yams are an entirely separate starchy tuber native to Africa and Asia that's rarely sold in North American stores at all. The mislabeling dates back to the 1930s when American sweet potato growers started calling their orange varieties yams, specifically to distinguish them from paler sweet potato varieties already on the market, and the marketing term simply never went away. Instant mashed potato flakes. Even the most processed form of potato has a surprisingly specific origin story. Dehydrated potato flakes were developed in the 1950s through a process where cooked potatoes are mashed, then dried on large heated rotating drums, which pulls out nearly all the moisture while leaving the starch structure intact enough to rehydrate almost instantly when hot water or milk is added back in. The technique was actually refined with support from U.S. Department of Agriculture researchers looking for lightweight, shelf-stable food that could be shipped efficiently, and it later became a staple in military rations and space program food kits, precisely because of how much weight and spoilage risk it eliminated compared to fresh potatoes. At the end of the day, the potato covers an almost absurd amount of ground for a plant that grows as an unassuming lump underground. A hand-harvested La Bonnotte on a French island and a mass-produced russet destined for a fast food fryer are, in their own strange way, both descendants of the exact same wild Andean tuber, just pulled in wildly different directions by centuries of breeding, geography, and culture. That's really the through line connecting everything here, from a purple potato bread at Cornell for its antioxidants to a Maris Piper standing guard over a British chip shop counter. Every single variety on this list found its way to your plate through some combination of accident, necessity, and deliberate human effort. Whether that meant surviving a blight, filling a ration kit, or just tasting good enough to be worth growing by hand on a tiny island. Whether it's a bag of russets grabbed without a second thought or a small pile of heirloom fingerlings roasted whole because they deserved better than that, the potato offers both ends of that spectrum just as well as tea does. People who go out of their way to look past the single bag of potatoes they grew up with tend to notice something interesting. The world got a lot bigger, one tuber at a time.